Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So, in the wake of the new economy changes being added to the game, I thought it would be a great time to do a best returning player decks video. So, one of the things I was most excited about with Snap Packs and the overhaul of the economy is that I feel like there is a very clear-cut path to getting someone who, you know, maybe played Marvel Snap at the start of the game, stuck with it for a while, and eventually fell off. There's a very clear path to getting a person in that boat back into the game today and getting them a up-to-date, strong deck in a much shorter time period than it used to take. So that's what this video is all about. We're going to go through the process, the do's and don'ts, and then the various decks. I have 10 different decks here, so I'm hoping there's a little bit of something for everybody, regardless of what kind of stuff you like to play. So I'm pretty excited about this. Let's dive on into it. But before we do, if you want, you know, a breakdown of the economy changes and everything that's different and all that stuff, definitely recommend checking out my Snap Packs review. All of it linked in the description. It's a little long, but it does give you a full in-depth breakdown of everything that has changed in the game economy. So to start out, what are the goals of this guide? The goals of this guide are to present a clear path to help lapsed players get back into the game. This guide is going to be focusing on players who were Series 3 complete or roughly around there before they quit the game. Now, there have been series drops since then, so if you were Series 3 complete, when you come back, you probably won't be anymore, but you shouldn't be missing too many Series 3 cards, and by the time you get enough resources to get the higher series cards for these decks, you will also probably be Series 3 complete again if you were before you stopped playing. Eventually, I'm going to have a separate guide for players who are brand new to the game. That's going to take a bit more work and figuring things out because it's a pretty different experience, but that is something I do want to have in the future if you are someone who is kind of a brand new player looking to start Snap. But this one is much more directed at returning players. And these decks provide a good variety of different playstyles, so there should be a lot of options depending on what kind of gameplay you enjoy the most. The most important advice of this guide is going to be that you should probably avoid Snap Packs. Snap Packs have pros and cons, and they are things you can optimize, and actually have a lot of nice things to say about packs, but the real thing that has enabled me to make this guide that I wouldn't have been able to do before the economy rework is you can just buy the cards you want from the token shop. There's no gambling, there's no, you know, low rolling, high rolling. It's just you have this resource, you pay this resource, you get the cards, and that's what's going to give us that direct path to getting the decks in this video. Because of that, the best way to get these decks as soon as possible is by checking your token shop pretty religiously. So every 8 hours, the token shop refreshes, showing you a new card in the Series 4 and Series 5 slots. So if you want to see the cards you need to pick up with your tokens the fastest possible, you should be checking 3 times a day if you can. And the last thing here is if you are unfamiliar with how these decks play, I'd highly encourage watching gameplay before you commit to choosing one that you want to work towards. There's a ton of Snap gameplay out here on YouTube. I'm sure you can find stuff with all the decks listed in this video. I don't do too much gameplay coverage anymore because it just didn't seem to be working out very well outside of my regular streaming. But there are still a ton of people who do that on YouTube for Snap, so I have no doubt that you'll be able to find footage with these decks to get a feel of how they play and if it's something that looks appealing to you. Also, I didn't put this in the slide here, but I did want to bring it up. One thing that has also changed a lot besides from the economy is the balance has gotten a lot better in this game. For the first year and a half of Snap, you might remember, it was pretty dog shit. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The balance in this game was not always very good. It was pretty good on launch, and then we had the Zabu and Silver Surfer seasons, and, well, it was pretty downhill from there and afterwards. A common complaint was that back in the day in Snap, it kind of rotated between S-tier decks that were just more dominant than everything else, and I'm happy to say that, at least more recently, in the last 6 months or so, it hasn't really been anything like that. Of course, there'll always be some decks that are better than others, and things change, but in general, I do think they have pretty remarkably improved the balance in this game, and it's made it a lot more enjoyable. So here's the big question. How long will it take to actually do this? If I'm a player returning to Marvel Snap and I want to build one of the decks in this video, assuming you have no resources from when you quit, you're just a Series 3 complete player, or you were a Series 3 complete player, and you didn't have any resources saved up, how long does it take to build one of the decks in this video? If you are a full free-to-play player and you do all your daily and weekly quests, it should take about 5 to 6 weeks of doing that before you have all the resources you need to acquire the cards you need to complete one of these decks. Now, this is something that can be sped up by spending money, obviously. If you want to spend money to speed things up, Season Pass remains the best value in Marvel Snap, or you can go for some of the high percentage value bundles. If you want more in-depth info on that, definitely recommend checking out either Snap Zone or Snap Fan. They have some pretty good articles on that kind of stuff for which bundles are good. But even if you're a person who wants to spend a lot of money to speed things up a lot, it's worth noting that you are going to still be limited by the token shop rotation. That is going to be the biggest limiter for someone who is fine spending a bunch of money to do it as fast as possible. You can't just go into your collection and instantly buy all the cards at once. You have to wait for them to rotate in through the token shop, and you're missing a lot of cards that might take a little bit longer. So that might be the biggest roadblock there if you're a player who is going to be spending money. So that's something you should be aware of. Even if you have all the resources, it still is going to take you some time to just rotate through the cards and find the ones you're looking for. But again, it is a much more efficient method of acquiring what you want than gambling in the packs. And then we have choosing your deck. How do you choose which of these decks is the most appealing to you? So I think the most important thing is finding something that really jives with you well, rather than just going for the highest power level thing. Marvel Snap changes a lot. We have new card releases all the time. We have balance updates normally every 2 weeks. So what's on top of the metagame changes pretty regularly. So I wouldn't recommend just going with one of these decks because it seems like the best at the time. Like, for example, Thanos is one of the best decks right now. Really strong. Will Thanos still be the best deck in 2 weeks or a month? Nobody really knows because things will probably change a lot. So I wouldn't personally just go with a deck because it's a high power level. When I was creating and selecting these decks, I tried to make sure that all of the ones included are of a high enough power level that they should be at the very least competitive, if not, a tier 1 or a tier 2 deck. So with that said, definitely focus on what you think will be the most fun rather than the objectively strongest, because what is strongest changes, whereas what is fun for you might not. And then, like I said before, watch gameplay with stuff before you hard commit to something. Get an idea for how a deck plays, how the snap patterns work, and if it looks like something that you actually want to play and engage with. Because just because a deck is strong doesn't mean it's something you're going to enjoy playing. So I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind with stuff like this. So here are the decks. We have 10 decks here. I'm going to dive into all of them individually and talk a little bit about them. I'm not going to dive super deep into the play patterns and stuff. You can find that in other videos and gameplay. But I am going to give just a little short summary on what these decks do well and include the order you might want to acquire the higher series cards in while you are working towards building it. First up, we have Thanos Ongoing. Thanos Ongoing is currently a top tier deck. If you're an older Marvel Snap player, you might remember that Spectrum never really did that great outside of maybe at the very beginning of the game with ongoing Professor X Destroyer stuff. But Spectrum is now, a core part of one of the best decks in the game, Ongoing Thanos. Drawing cards is a super fun and unique element of Thanos that just you don't really get to do with most of the other archetypes in the game because Marvel Snap has a small deck size. So normally you don't get to draw many cards. Thanos gives you something a little bit different to do. Thanos also always starts in your hand now, so you always have the possibility to play him. And he's kind of unique in that if you play all the stones, you can make a really big Thanos, which is something I think a lot of people find fun. Generally speaking, I think this Ongoing Thanos is pretty easy to play. It's one of the easier decks to learn, especially relative to its power level. It can find success at going tall in 2 lanes or going wide across all 3, which is very good. And it's overall just a very consistent deck. Now, this is one you can upgrade further. Thanos is probably the least budget of all the decks on here, and I included 5 cards for him, whereas most of the other decks have 4. That last 5th card, Goliath, is probably the easiest one to sub out with just a generic 2-drop Ongoing card, like maybe an armor or something. but I did want to include it here because he does add a pretty significant portion of additional power to the deck if you can get a hold of him. And then on the right here, this is the order that I think you should be acquiring these cards for building this deck. First up, you want to get Thanos, the namesake of the deck. Doesn't work without him. Mockingbird's a really strong card that benefits from the fact that Thanos is spamming out all these stones to reduce her cost. Sam Wilson is one of the best cards in the game, powerful 2-drop scaler, and helps reduce Mockingbird as synergy with other ongoings, and Captain America, just a really solid card overall. Wiccan provides you with a bit of extra energy, so that way you can get more of your cards down onto the field. And Goliath is just a best-in-slot ongoing 2-drop that rewards you for playing all these other ongoing cards. Now, there are some other upgrades you can do. There are a lot of popular ongoing Thanos lists going around, but this one is pretty close to optimal. I'd say if you're looking for any additional higher series cards to benefit it, you could probably swap out Mobius for speed. But other than that, stock ongoing Thanos is just one of the better lists in the game, and is one I would highly recommend for a player to go for, especially if maybe you already have some of the cards from this list like Thanos. Then we have Mr. Negative. This is a classic combo deck, maybe the most iconic combo deck in all of Marvel Snap, and it's been around since the beginning of the game, but it is quite a bit better than you might remember it being from the last time you have played. So the big thing with these combo decks is they're very reliant on the snapping and retreating mechanic. If you don't try your Mr. Negative, you're probably gonna have a bad time because this deck is built around just drawing Mr. Negative and abusing that. There are, backup plans here where you can use Ravonna, who reduced your 0 power cards to make it a little easier to play them. But in general, this is a very all-in combo deck where you're trying to maximize getting as many cubes as you can from the games where you get down Mr. Negative on turn 3 or turn 4, and then get some pretty big mana cheat to flip your super powerful, impactful cards and make them go from costing 5 or 6 to being super free and easy to play. It can go taller than just about any other deck in the game with a good draw. It's pretty much almost impossible to outpower on points, but you do have to keep in mind it can have some issues with opposing tech cards or bad draws. You're not really happy when your opponent plays a Mobius to prevent your cost reduction after you slam down Mr. Negative, or if they have a Enchantress for all your ongoing stuff. In terms of the cards you want to acquire, Gore is probably the one I'd recommend getting first, with Ravonna being the second best, Cassandra being third, and Sage being fourth. Then we have Silver Surfer buffs. So Silver Surfer has been a pretty popular archetype throughout the life of the game, and it has only gotten better over time. Now there are so many different ways you could build it, but for the little bit more budget-focused version, I decided to focus on one that was more built around buffing up your own cards, as I think that's kind of a fun thing to do and synergizes with, just what Surfer wants to naturally do, which is buff up all your 3-drops. So if you're someone who just likes buffing up all your cards and watching those green numbers get bigger, this might be a deck for you. The other thing that's really nice about Silver Surfer is it's a deck that very easily runs tech cards that can be good in a wide variety of matchups. In this list, for example, Killmonger and Red Guardian are the 2 big tech cards. Killmonger, very powerful against all the Thanos going around, and Red Guardian's a pretty good catch-all where he can just silence the ability of many powerful cards, like Iron Man, for example. Now, Surfer is a very customizable deck. There are so many more good 3-drops in the game than when Silver Surfer initially came out. So another benefit about choosing this list is you can adapt it more as you fill out your collection and try and experiment with all these other powerful 3-drops. Copycat is a good example of one that sees play in a ton of different Surfer lists, Rocket and Groot. There are a lot of really cool, powerful 3-drops that you can customize your Surfer deck with. This is just the way I opted to go with it for a little bit more budget-focused version. In terms of the order you want to prioritize getting cards for this one, Galacta is probably going to be at number 1, just so much synergy with the deck, giving that extra +3 power to your Broodling or your Sebastian Shaw is just something that really adds up throughout the course of the game. Captain Carter is going to be number 2, just a really good card that benefits a lot off of scaling. Shaw goes super duper tall off of scaling. And then Red Guardian's our last one, giving you an answer to a wide variety of threats your opponent might have. Then we have Sarah Control. So this is a classic. If you played Snap at the beginning, you might remember Sarah Control was one of the best decks, and it remained a high tier deck throughout much of Snap's life. Now, over time, it's gone up and down. There have been many metas where Certter Control wasn't super playable, but things have circled back around a bit, and I think it is a fairly viable deck nowadays. And this is probably the deck I would recommend the most if you're someone who favors a more control-y playstyle, where instead of just trying to put out the biggest number possible yourself, you'd rather take away the opponent's big number. And Certter Control does that very effectively with a wide variety of tech cards: Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Killmonger, Red Guardian. You just have a lot of answers here to stop opponents' threats. And as such, it gives you a lot of game into a wide variety of opponents' decks. Now, with Certter Control, this is a deck you have to be a little bit more mindful about priority with, as oftentimes you want to be throwing priority so that your cards reveal second, and you get that maximum value out of your tech cards. Like if you're expecting your opponent to play a big Thanos on the final turn, you want them to have priority so you can hopefully Shang-Chi it. But in the offhand chance you do happen to snag priority, we do have Invisible Woman here, so you can hide your cards to reveal at the end of the game. Even if you have priority, they will still go off after the opponent, which can be fairly useful. And probably the biggest weakness that Certter Control struggles with sometimes is the fact that if you aren't leveraging your tech cards effectively, or if your opponent isn't playing stuff that is weak to these tech cards, sometimes it can struggle to put up the power you need to win the game. So that's kind of the downside. It's really effective at taking down a variety of strategies that are weak to these various tech cards. But if you aren't able to draw the right one at the right time, or your opponent's deck isn't really as weak to them, this deck isn't known for putting out massive power on its own, unless you happen to get like a Gwenpool hit on a Mysterio and Mysterio Monkey. That can be pretty big, but other than that, it is a little bit lacking on its own power if the tech cards aren't getting value. And in terms of the card pickup order, I'd recommend Red Guardian first, then Gwenpool, Hitmonkey, and Copycat. Then we have the resident Big Dudes deck, Certter Scar Big Guys. This deck has a huge power output, so the idea behind it is, well, you're using this card Sauron to remove all of these otherwise negative ongoing effects from your cards, and making them just overstated bodies as a result. Cards like Ebony Maw that don't let you play in the lane, Typhoid Mary and Red Skull that give a pretty big downside to either your own cards or an upside to your opponent's cards. Turns out taking the text off of those cards makes them rather strong. So that's kind of what this deck is all about. We don't really run protection like some of the older versions of the Certter decks did, because most of the protections are ongoings, and the whole point of this deck is to use Sauron to get rid of all the ongoings in our deck. So you do have a bit of a trade-off here. It's pretty fun taking these cards that otherwise have a big downside and making them just very efficient stat sticks, but as such, you are going to have a bigger weakness to cards like Shang-Chi. One of the other positives of this deck, though, is it is pretty easy to play. So if you're just looking for something that is very straightforward and puts out a lot of power, Certter Scar is a pretty good choice. In terms of the order I'd recommend getting the cards, I'd start out with Starbrand, followed by Scar, Ares, and Certter. Then we have another combo deck, Bullseye Discard. So Discard has changed quite a bit from the days of old with Apocalypse. There are still some Apocalypse out there. They look pretty different than they used to, but I think the Bullseye lists are a bit more consistent and a little flashier. So this deck makes a ton of big numbers by generating a bunch of swarms and discarding your Scorn over and over, as well as making multiple Dakins that get really, really big when you discard his Murmasa Shard. The downside of this deck is it is a bit weaker to tech, and you don't really have too much in the way of interaction for decks that might go taller than you, besides getting a lucky high roll with Gambit. But this deck is a very effective kind of mid-rangey combo deck, where if you get those optimal draws, you put up really, really high power that if your opponent doesn't have tech against, can be really hard to beat. So if you love discarding cards over and over and getting all this benefit out of it, Discard might be a good deck for you. The order for the higher series cards in this deck you want to get is Dakin, followed by Bullseye, Frigga, Scorn, and Meat. With most of these lists, I've tried pretty hard to limit the amount of higher series cards you need to 4. This one has 5, but 2 of them are series 4 cards, so it effectively costs the same. Then we have Arsham card generation. So if you're a big fan of RNG, flashy randomness, having things go different every game, Arsham is probably the card for you. That high variance can be, a pro or a con, depending on what you enjoy. As someone who likes, knowing what my deck is going to do and maximizing that consistency, Arsham's never really been my kind of thing. But there are a lot of people who really put value in the fact that the games play out differently every time. So if you fall into that kind of boat, Arsham is probably the deck for you. Because Arsham puts all these other extra cards in your deck, there is a lot of cube equity in Arsham because your opponent can't realistically always play around the cards you have because you didn't even know those cards were in your deck when you started the game. The other thing with that is because Arsham has a bigger deck size, oftentimes opponents are more likely to take the risk of you not having that key tech card since it is statistically less likely for you to have it compared to other 12-card decks. And Arsham's always been very effective at being able to include a wide variety of tech cards. In this list specifically, we have Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Mobius as really good ways to hate on a variety of different decks, and a lot of different card generation to give us more options of things to play with our excess energy, and to have some synergy with Isan, who pulls cards out of your hand that were created by these other created cards or Arsham. In terms of the order you want to get these cards, Arsham is going to be the first. Obviously, he defines the archetype, followed by Mockingbird, Galacta, and Isan. Then we have Move Bounce, and this is one I really struggled with to decide if I wanted to put this in this video, because for the vast majority of players, this is not a deck I would recommend to them. And it's not because it's not good, it's because it is probably one of, if not the hardest deck to play properly in the game, and it has that kind of combo-oriented play style where you need to draw your enablers and your payoffs. So it can be tricky, and it's not always obvious what the right plays are to make. I think most high-level players would tell you that this is one of the hardest decks to play properly in the entire game. There is, I think, a certain audience of players who really like that challenge. They like learning all the intricacies and the ins and outs and how things differ from game to game. So very high skill ceiling, and it can be very rewarding to play if you do learn all the depth and the lines and are good at it. But the downside is the vast majority of players, I think, don't have a ton of success with this deck because it is incredibly hard to play super optimally. One thing worth noting, I think Falcon is a little bit of a budget include in this deck. Right now in the stock version, Sage is the card that takes up that spot, so that is something you can potentially upgrade it further with. And we did just get some new move cards. Maybe one of those finds their way in here as well. We'll see. But this is a very, very powerful deck if you are in that group of players who is up for the challenge of learning it. But again, not something I would recommend to a majority of players unless move is like your absolute favorite archetype. In terms of the order you want to pick up the cards, first is Madam Web, then Aranya, Frigga, and Toxin. Then we have Khazar Zoo. This is a all-time classic. Many of you probably have fond memories of playing with Khazar at the very start of Marvel Snap, as that is kind of one of the better Pool 1 and Pool 2 archetypes, and I'm happy to say that it is still a viable archetype to this day, though it might look a little bit different than it did in the past. Zoo's always been kind of fun because it is very effective at filling up the whole board, which I think many people find satisfying. I know I certainly do. And it really rewards you for playing out a lot of cards on the board. It's very effective at going wide and playing for all three lanes. And personally, that's something I've always found to be pretty fun, just watching the board fill up and then using our ongoing cards to boost it up with things like Khazar and Blue Marvel, and the more recently added Gilgamesh, who gains power based on all your other cards that have gained additional power throughout the game. In terms of the order you want to pick these cards up in, Mockingbird is going to be number 1, followed by Sam Wilson, Kate Bishop, and Gilgamesh. And last but not least, we have Scream Move. This is another one of my favorite decks personally. If you want to embrace your inner Bully Maguire and move people around with Spider-Man and sap their strength while boosting your own with Scream, this is going to be the deck for you. This is very good at disrupting the opponent's plan because you're constantly moving their cards across the board and getting benefits from it. By pumping up your Scream, by getting more points on your Kraven, and just by putting their power in places they might not want it to be. I think it's a lot of fun watching the cards move around the board, and I think for the average player, this deck is a lot more fun and easier to play as a move deck compared to the traditional Heimdall move or the move bounce I just showcased. And it has a lot of small scalers, so cards like Scream, Captain America, and Kraven, they start out kind of small, but they grow a lot throughout the course of the game, which is pretty fun. I also want to shout out a recent potential upgrade to this deck. Batroc the Leaper is a card that just dropped this week and has been seeing a lot of success in these Scream decks. So if you are interested in that card, I think it might actually be even better than Iron Patriot. But I made these lists a few days ago, so that's why Iron Patriot's still in here. I don't think you can go wrong either way, but Batroc is a cheaper card at Series 4, and I think might just be better, so keep that in mind for the Iron Patriot slot as a alternate option that I think might be preferable. In terms of the order you want to get these cards in, first is going to be Scream, the namesake of the deck, followed by Sam Wilson, Cannonball, Rocket and Groot, and Iron Patriot. Now, this is another one where I allowed an additional card in here. Normally, I'd kind of cap it out at 4 Series 5s, but I figured Cannonball's a Series 4, and now with the addition of Batroc, who's also a Series 4, finding his way into this deck in place of Iron Patriot, you could put him in that spot instead and have the deck be a little bit cheaper. And there we have it. Those are my top 10 decks to get back into Marvel Snap with. I will have links in the description if you want to import any of these decks into the game for yourself. I really hope this video has been helpful or useful to you. I'm pretty passionate about helping people get back into card games. It's something I've done with friends and numerous card games many times over the years. And so I spent a lot of time really thinking about this and just the way to present it to hopefully make it as easy as possible for people to have that path for getting back into the game if they want to. It'll take a little bit of time. Again, the estimated time I had for this being full free to play doing your quests is probably about 5 to 6 weeks, but that is significantly better than it has ever been throughout the lifespan of the game, where, not exaggerating, it could take like 8 months to a year sometimes to build these decks under the old Spotlight system, which by the time you actually got all the cards, who knows if the decks are even worth playing still. All that time later, because so many new cards have come out and the balance in the game has changed. But I think these ones that I've listed here should stick around for a while, and if nothing else, will provide you with a very good baseline to get back into the game. So I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know what your experience has been like. Are you a player who is returning to the game? And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. So I hope this was useful. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.